All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to share this opportunity out with the larger community. This is a recent award and announcement, and so there's lots of opportunities involved with it. We have a number of you joining from all across the state, so we're super excited. And I will hand it over to Neil. Neil is the Chief Scientific Officer at Dakota BioWorx, and he'll do a brief presentation on the overview of the work that Dakota BioWorx is doing, and also more on the recent announcement from BioMade and a look at what this opportunity will be. We have a few other on the call. Just for those that haven't met me, I'm Kara McCormick. I'm with South Dakota Biotech, and we also have Joni Ekstrom on the call, Trayton Peck from Department of Labor and Resources, and Ananda from SDSU, and they've all been an important part of this project as well. And with that, Neil, I'll kick it over to you and let you get started.
Okay, thank you, Kara, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the call. Yeah, we're very excited about this BioMade grant and the opportunities that it's going to present for biomanufacturing in the state. I'm going to go through a slide deck that has kind of level sets biomanufacturing, kind of where it is right now. Also a little bit about Dakota BioWorx for those folks who are not aware of what we're about. And then we'll get into, more of the details of the grant. So, Dakota BioWorx we are a contract development and piloting facility. We're a nonprofit. We've got lots of space. We work off of a fee-for-service model in a building that was funded by kind of a coalition of the willing that had the foresight to establish, and the vision to establish this facility, a few years back. I think one of the biggest things, is what our missions are. And when I joined a couple of years ago, clearly the mission, was to grow our bioprocess development and scale up business. And a big part of that is to support, internal or in-state innovators as part of growing the biomanufacturing and bioeconomy in the state. But the other thing that when I spoke with Craig Arnold about, I was very passionate about establishing a workforce development program because even though the intentions might be to grow the biomanufacturing and bioeconomy, you won't do that if you don't have a skilled workforce. And I think on many occasions, people look at workforce, they look at sort of benchtop R&D scale, and what if you're going to do biomanufacturing, you really need to be able to train people at a scale that is representative of biomanufacturing. As I describe it quite succinctly, you need people who learn with the big toys in the big sandbox. So that was something that I was very passionate about. I spent, 10 of my 17 years at Merck, in a fermentation pilot plant working with supervisors and operators. So I was very tuned into, the importance of training that these folks had. Very quickly, again, I said big toys in the big sandbox. Dakota BioWorx has all of those. We can do work at let me get my pointer out here. There we go. We can do work at the benchtop scale. We can do work at sort of a larger lab scale, and then we can do fermentation work at the 300 liter and 3,000 liter scale. We've got, everything that you would expect a modern, bioprocess development facility to have in terms of being able to do control, online data capture, all the supplemental equipment. Um, Similarly, once you've kind of grown up a tank full of cells, you need to process them, and depending on exactly what the product is, we can separate cells from broth. We can disrupt those cells. We can do filtration to either recover cells or recover a protein product, and then we can generate a powdered form of the final material either through lyophilization or through spray drying. So again, everything that we're using here, whether it's centrifugation or filtration or the drying capabilities, are all sort of pilot scale pieces of equipment that provide opportunities to train biomanufacturing workforce members on. I want to so that's kind of a quick overview of, again, the big toys in the big sandbox that we have at Dakota BioWorx. What I want to do is sort of kind of take a 10,000-foot view about why biomanufacturing is building some of the momentum that it's building. We hear about it all the time. In 2025, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology issued a report talking about the what it will take and what's required to grow biomanufacturing in the country in the U.S. And I've just sort of cherry picked a handful of quotes here that I wanted to share with you to kind of frame the discussion around why a workforce is going to be important. You can get the final report is available online. I thought the first one was really important, that for many years, and this goes back to while I was in graduate school, that biology was a field of discovery, and that has now transitioned into a field of design. And when you talk about synthetic biology and be able to wire organisms genetically to be able to produce what you want them to produce, there's no bigger examples than that. The second is by 2035, biomanufacturing will be used to onshore, and I think onshore is a really important underlined and bold word. The production of critical chemicals, securing supply chains, and supporting new jobs. This is a big point in this report. The final one is, how much the U.S. government should dedicate over the next 5 years to help support this. And I know that there is initiatives underway to be able to make that happen. And then on the right-hand side is just simply what the projected growth of the biotech market is. And so again, when you start looking at those kinds of things, you ask the question, okay, what is going to be required to generate a 1.8, almost 1.8 trillion dollar biotech market by 2033. And one of the important things is going to be the workforce. Recently, the Department of War identified biomanufacturing as a very important, as a critical technology area. They are looking at a number of ways of generating materials and supplies that are critical to war fighters. And so this is something that the Department of War is very, very keen on as well. So I think when you look at the importance that's been assigned to biomanufacturing at the federal government level, I think that provides a great deal of excitement in terms of the momentum that we want to generate on training. I always like to throw a few slides in because we talk about biomanufacturing like it's a brand new thing. It's been around for, almost a century, starting with, the production of penicillin, the production of human insulin, a number of different milestones along the way. And it's really in the 2000s where commodity chemicals and specialty chemicals are now something that can be produced by using the tools of synthetic and systems biology to rewire organisms. I always love showing this slide to students as well. This is on the left-hand side. This is Herbert Boyer and Robert Swanson, who are the founders of Genentech. And you read on the blackboard here, kind of their idea about putting a synthetic piece of DNA in a plasmid and then putting it back in E. coli. That is, what was the beginnings of a company is that is now gets done as a high school lab experiment. And on the right-hand side is the Genentech team that was responsible for producing human insulin in E. coli. So the history of modern of biotech and biomanufacturing is not something that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. It's something that's gone on for about the last 100 years. And it's really been synthetic biology that's, I think, in the last 5 to 10 years is something that's really driven um, what we're capable of doing rather than taking organisms and just being and settling for the things that they produce naturally. We're able to produce whatever we want to. Again, as I indicated at the beginning, this is a field of design, not just a field of discovery. So we're not limited to just what the organism is capable of doing. We can recruit genes from all forms of life. We can even modify enzymes. If we don't like what an enzyme that we've put into a cell is capable of doing, well, we have the tools now to go in and modify that enzyme and make it do what we want it to do, or make it more efficient at what we want it to do. This is just a quick and just to kind of provide some additional context on the inner ring here is a number of intermediates that can be chemical intermediates that can be made by fermentation using strains that have been generated by synthetic biology. Not necessarily that they're all commercially viable for doing this. And on the outer ring, though, is I think the more important thing is that how these feedstocks or these chemicals then go into the materials that we use every single day. Okay, you look through here and you see polystyrenes, you see polyurethanes, you see polyamides. These are all the materials that we come in contact with every single day. And so the drive is to be able to produce these things using biomanufacturing and in part be able to, establish that domestic industry. I'll buzz through a few quick success stories. Propane diol was one that was, and you don't need to, again, I'm going to science geek out a little bit. And for those of you that can follow this, that's fantastic. But what I wanted to be able to do was just simply indicate that there are already some success stories about this, where, on the left-hand side, this is how 1,3-propane diol normally gets made. And this is an example of an E. coli, kind of the workhorse bacteria in the industry, how that has been kind of modified to be able to produce it and what the metrics are for production. And it all comes from, glucose that comes from corn. And I think for South Dakota, that's a very important thing. And I've indicated, what the final tail of the tape was as far as yields were in 2025. So lots of opportunity to be able to take advantage of corn that's produced in the state. Another one is that's kind of goes back a few years is 1,4-butane diol. This was another kind of Genomatica work where they actually took an E. coli strain and they were able to make this 1,4-butane diol. And again, that starts from glucose that is derived from corn. And then finally, kind of another example of instead of having to purify Reb D and Reb M from the stevia plant, we can take yeast, we can put different genes in, and we can make those directly, again, starting from glucose. So let me go back to some more of the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology's 6 pillars and kind of bring the discussion back to workforce development. The first item here talks about creating a network of manufacturing facilities across the country. to be able to support scale up of some of the different innovations that will take place in the state and in the country. There's a dearth of these facilities in the US, and I can tell you from experience that when there aren't many in the US, you have to look to Eastern Europe or Asia to do scale up work. And a couple of years ago, I spent 2 weeks in India doing a scale up project. But the final two are the ones I think that are very important for this discussion, and that these two revolve around workforce development. Again, if we're going to emphasize biomanufacturing, we're going to have a network of facilities to do scale up and to do production, we need a workforce. And I think that's true on the macro level across the country, but it's also true at sort of the state level. If we want to attract, additional biomanufacturing to the state, we need to be able to say we have a workforce, that is ready to go. And when we talk about workforce, it's not just all, PhDs and master's degree people. There's really opportunities across the educational spectrum. And I think that is extremely important for people to understand about, people coming out of high school or coming out of technical colleges, with either a diploma or a 2-year degree. There is going to be a lot of opportunities at that particular level. And a big part of what we're focused on with this particular BioMade grant is at these two levels, generating operational staff that will staff these facilities, pilot facilities, biomanufacturing facilities. And if we have that workforce, we will be able to attract companies to the state. There are already companies that are migrating away from the coasts to the Midwest, because they realize that that's where the corn is, and that's where the glucose will be. And we need to be ready to be able to welcome those companies. So what does Dakota BioWorx? How does Dakota BioWorx think about closing sort of these biomanufacturing and workforce development gaps? On the professional side of things, the scientists, the engineers, degree level people, it's been my belief that all of this effort and attention on synthetic biology and systems biology, AI, machine learning has really kind of taken away from folks that really understand bioprocess unit operations. And so what we want to be able to do is create opportunities for them to try to understand where is the strain that they're creating in the lab, or where is the computer program or the software that they're generating, how is it going to be used at full scale? From there, it's probably those are kind of a series of boot camps and whatnot. My kind of passion is on this side of things, the operational side of things. When I was at Merck, for every kind of one person who was responsible for generating or was overseeing a set of batches being run in our pilot plant, there were 12 supervisors and operators who worked around the clock to execute those batches. So there's clearly more folks who are going to be hands-on running batches at pilot and in full manufacturing scale than there are kind of scientists or engineers who are going to oversee the batches. And again, one of the biggest problems that I saw is that the operators were considered unskilled labor. There was no formal training programs. And so what our grant looks to do is to kind of change that so that, a bioprocess operator is viewed as skilled labor. And the best way to do that, if you're going to take a page out of the building trades, is to then establish an apprenticeship program. And that is what we have, a big part of what's in our grant. And that is what we are working with Start Today SD. And I'll ask Trayton in a few minutes to kind of say a few words. on that organization, along with Apprenti in the Department of Labor. And then finally, I had a really nice conversation with Vice Principal Tramer from Brookings High School about attracting students into biomanufacturing and into biotech in general. And he has provided me, there is some competition with other industries, even just in Brookings. And so we need to kind of build a bit more brand awareness on biotech and biomanufacturing. I've kind of said that's the solution. The problem really is that we've got too much TikTok and not enough biotech. So that is something this is kind of adjacent to the grant, but it's just something, that we want to start doing and start making sure that students understand what biotech and biomanufacturing is all about, as they start, kind of formulating their career choices. Um, Again, I like to use this slide, that training at the kind of the benchtop bioreactor and downstream processing scales is necessary, but not sufficient for creating a biomanufacturing workforce. If you just simply stop at this scale, you've got an R&D workforce. This is what it looks like. This is staring down into a 19,000 liter bioreactor in Merck's fermentation pilot plant. And, I will apologize to the HUDEC and POET people on the call who look at that and say, that's just a toy as well. That's just a seed fermenter. But this is kind of where we need to be. We can start here, but if we do not progress to training people at this scale, we won't have a biomanufacturing workforce. We will have just an R&D workforce. So at Dakota BioWorx, we have built out a training lab and a multi-purpose space on the second floor of the building. I welcome people to stop by and get a tour. And this is where we're going to kind of kick off the first part of our training as part of our BioMade grant. The other thing we've started to talk about, this is really kind of a hot topic, is this whole micro-credentialing for people to be able to start establishing sort of this stack of skills, whether it's, safety, documentation, microscopy, pipetting skills, weighing skills, things like that. Being able to provide these micro credentials that are things that people really and truly understand and can relate to. As Kara mentioned, and what you're probably all here to hear about, we just received this BioMade grant. It was, Dakota BioWorx and South Dakota Biotech are the two kind of prime organizations, but South Dakota State University has been instrumental in providing some important kind of pedagogy approaches to how to develop and deliver content, and they will be a key partner in all of this. I just put down here very kind of the high level objectives of this, and is to establish what exactly the workforce demand is going to be over the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And this is something that BioMade felt was really important about our grant, that we weren't just going out and building a program, we were actually going out and building a program against a workforce demand. Similarly, we have a voice of customer. And so many of you on this call, and we will take advantage of the mailing list that we generated to begin getting additional voice of customer. We have ideas in our heads about what we think the workforce skills gaps are and how to close them, but we really want to hear from the community about what they are, what those gaps are. Also, and what the hiring plan might be over the next, say, 3 to 5 years. One of the things that we're doing with this call is building awareness across the state so that the state folks, the biotech community within the state understands, what is being built and can take advantage of it. And then finally, we're going to use, the voice of customer to begin building this prototype training program at Dakota BioWorx that will start at the lab scale and will finish at the pilot scale, so that the folks who come out of this really do have an idea of what it means to do biomanufacturing. Not at full scale, it would still be pilot scale, but certainly a lot more representative of what's going to be required of them when they go to work for a biomanufacturing company. So I'm gonna shift. I'm gonna hand it off to Kara, to kind of handle the last few slides.
Thanks, Dell. Yeah, you did a great job of setting it up. I just wanted to do a few more slides, a little more detail on the work and partnership with BioMade. For those that aren't familiar with BioMade, they've essentially been set up as a national public-private consortium, really to focus on this bioindustrial manufacturing ecosystem. So if you think about Nimble as more biopharma, BioMade's a little bit more focused on the bioindustrial aspect. But essentially, they are the vehicle that the Department of War is using to push out a lot of this funding. They're funding projects in areas of technology and innovation, of course, education and workforce development like ours, and then also safety and security. So just I think it was this last week that we were at the BioMade meeting, actually over in Minneapolis. That's where they have their main headquarters, and so they are trying to really work on building out more of the network needed and resources needed to support scaling up this bioeconomy from a larger scale. And let's see, yeah, feel free if you have any other questions about BioMade. They are a member organization, which can be a little bit of a barrier because there's a cost associated with that, unfortunately. But they are still working on building out that network, and we're trying our best to be a liaison as well for the area. Neil, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll also talk a little bit about our organization, South Dakota Biotech. So we're essentially the leading industry association for our state, and really I think we can almost say only, that tries to represent science and technology across the state to support growth, whether that means workforce development, economic development, funding opportunities as well. We're also the SBA's state awardee for their federal and state technology program, which is designed to support innovation through federal funding and SBIR and STTR resources. So we have some funding to support new technology development for startup organizations. And then we also really try to be that connector for industry and academia. Our role in the BioMade program will be specifically around building that community outreach. We've developed a voice of customer or voice of industry survey to gather input from employers, educators, workforce partners, and we're going to be putting that all into a jobs report that really identifies current and future needs. This is actually going to cover a 5-state region, so it's not just South Dakota specific, but also North Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota. And then we've also been involved in reviewing other biotech programs across the nation as we're looking to build this up as a blueprint, essentially, as around training. We want to, or we realize we don't want to be reinventing the wheel. On the coast, there's already been some great work developing programs. We do think the Midwest is really the perfect spot to further develop these programs. So we're excited to be a part of this program. And then I think the next slide, we have just a little bit more on the pre-apprenticeship / apprenticeship opportunity, as well as some of the curriculum that's being developed and will be focused on. So Trayton, if you want to come on, I'll let you give a little bit of overview of the work that we're doing so far to integrate Start Today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trayton Peck. I'm an apprenticeship coordinator with the Start Today SD team. My team is under the purview of the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation. And basically, my job is to help employers with developing registered apprenticeships in the state of South Dakota. Within the last few months, I've been working with Dakota BioWorx and South Dakota Biotech to be able to help develop their own apprenticeship program, as well as kind of have a guideline for their pre-apprenticeship program. In this case, what's nice about apprenticeship that it helps with getting hands-on on the job learning, as well as getting an education component in there for the apprentices. So they're getting a combo of hands-on and education as well. We're currently kind of structuring it. You might see an industrial manufacturing technician. That's just due to the fact that USDOL has certain occupation titles that might not quite fit with what you might be envisioning, but they're pretty flexible with changing changing them into what you're kind of looking for. In this case, bioprocess operator. We are currently designing it as a hybrid apprenticeship where the length can range, so you kind of have a wide range and flexibility to be able to have the apprentices go through this program. Big things with apprenticeship is that training, in this case, it's going to be 1 to 2 years. That when it comes to hours, on the job learning, that's the hands-on portion. They basically allow USDOL requires apprentices to have 2,000 hours per year. So in this case, with the hybrid, we're doing 2,000 to 4,000 hours for on-the-job learning. And then for related instruction, that's that education component. Dakota BioWorx is going to be doing 160 hours of related instruction. What's good about apprenticeships is that there's also, it's a job basically. The apprentice will be getting paid while they're going through this training. And throughout the training, there is a wage progression tied to that. So like once the apprentice reaches a certain level of whether it's certain amount of hours or competencies, then they'll be getting a wage increase throughout that. It's an amazing opportunity, and we're happy to be a part of and helping these organizations build this in the state of South Dakota.
Neil, do you want to add a little bit more about how other companies can partner with Dakota BioWorx?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. Yeah, Trayton, thank you for kind of highlighting kind of what kind of the apprenticeship program looks like. I think what Dakota BioWorx is looking to establish is they would hold sort of the apprenticeship and would I don't want to use the term license, but we would be responsible for executing the apprenticeship program. So rather than having individual companies having their own apprenticeship programs, Dakota BioWorx would, provide this sort of initial, kind of training in the pre-apprenticeship program, and then would manage the apprentices that are working at the different biomanufacturing companies. So I think that makes it a much more palatable onboarding if Dakota BioWorx is responsible for kind of managing the apprentices, and the biomanufacturing companies are then kind of individually they are providing sort of that on the job training. So I think it becomes a bit more of a palatable or an easier on-ramp to be able to take this on. Again, the apprenticeship model is the one we're kind of looking at. As I've kind of looked back over my career, I think it's the one that makes the most sense in terms of being able to provide, quality operations staff, rather than kind of and also providing them with sort of a uniform training platform. So that's kind of how we see it being set up. Um, and to make it easier for companies to be able to take on an apprentice rather than having their own apprenticeship management component to, let's say, to their HR group.
And Neil and Ananda, if you want to chime in about the curriculum, this is almost our last slide. Then we'll get to the Q&A.
Sure. So I'll kick it off. A big part of what we're doing on the curriculum side of things is, again, these are folks who have maybe just a basic biology background. We've got to make sure that they understand safety, that they can work in a safely in a large scale environment, which clearly is different from kind of lab scale. Provide them the basics of the industry, the basics of microbial growth, unit operations at both in the upstream and the downstream, the fundamentals in the lab. We expect our operators to be able to kind of handle many more tasks, especially if they're working on a night shift. We want them to understand how things are, to do simple analyses, load an HPLC, take an OD sample, a dry cell weight, things like that. And that would kind of extends to sort of the hands-on operation in the lab, um, to be able to to work with basic pieces of equipment. And I think the final piece is sort of this sort of professional. Again, we're looking at bioprocess operators and as not just a job. This is meant to be a career. And with that, comes the responsibility of having, a professional skill set in terms of communication, teamwork, accountability, things like that. I think one of the overarching goals we have here on these later skill sets is to make certain that operators do not just view themselves as in a silo, that my job is to press this button at this particular time. They need to understand the job that they're doing in the broader context of the company that they're working at. That to me is also very important. Again, I saw many operators who they just understood, I press this button at this time. And they didn't understand that if I didn't press this button at this time, or I didn't document, a particular, step in a unit operation correctly, there are implications for the company. And I think that is something we want to make certain that um, our trainees understand, that they understand the context of within the company. Ananda, I don't know if you want to kind of add some additional
I think
context.
you covered everything what was I'm about to say, so it's perfectly fine.
Okay. Oh, I guess we're out of slides. This is just the Dakota BioWorks team. I did, and the only thing I wanted to point out with highlighting the Dakota BioWorks team, is the number of folks from SD Mines and SDSU, who are, working at Dakota BioWorks. So again, this kind of represents, a bit of a snapshot of what we would like to see, across the state as we bring in more biomanufacturing. So with that, I saw that there was a number of questions in the chat already. Kara. I don't know how you want to, do you
Sure.
want to just, I can stop sharing if you want to start.
If you want to go to the last slide, it does have our contact info,
Oh,
and
sorry.
I'll put
Sorry.
that in the chat as well. But yeah, just to cue off the questions, Jeremy put in the chat, what are the systems being used in the biotech industry over the past few decades that are being used as a foundation to improve or scale on?
Let me get, okay. You want to just pull those questions up?
Sure. They're under, if you're able to pull up the
Oh, okay.
chat, they're just in the meeting chat. And Jeremy, you're welcome to come off mute. Are you thinking as far as systems like around education or more just operational?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the technology's been around for a long time, and you got companies out there like, I'm more on the, I would say, industrial commodity side of things, but companies like ADM, Cargill, um, that have been doing this for many decades, that have some type of success in getting in different levels of education and training them to be operations and getting their systems to function correctly. I mean, is the goal of this to try to find a completely new approach, or to work with folks that already have approaches and sort of build on that, so it can be scaled more effectively? That's sort of my key question there.
Okay. Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for joining the call and providing the question. I think what we want to do is maybe to some extent provide sort of a centralized approach to training operators. Through this initially this 8-week apprenticeship program, that pre-apprenticeship program, that either people that come in and are already been hired by a company, by a Hodek or a Poet, for example, and they go through this so that by the time they get to their, the company that has hired them, they have a much better understanding of the fundamentals. I think part of it is more standardization and centralization of the training. I'm sure that every company has their own sort of approach. I know at Merck basically, was sort of an on-the-job type of thing where you spent, you were made basically a job shadow type of thing, and you learned from the person that you happened to be working with on shift. So I think this is centralizing and standardizing is kind of where we're going for, which is why this voice of customer is important, because we don't want to standardize or centralize around the wrong approaches, the wrong assumptions.
Yeah. One thing that I've just seen as helpful over the years is getting the right, group of people on, what you really get down to here with the operators is like the structure of a shift. And, how do you integrate all these different skill sets, right, to keep a plant running effectively?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just kind of really understanding what that mix looks like and what the systems and processes that are being used to create, people who are proficient in operations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Jeremy. All right. Next question from Ben from Sanford Research. Brookings is a great pathway into science with the university. How do we ensure that folks in the center of the state or West River have opportunities? I'm going to let Kara handle this because this is a community outreach question.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're keeping top of mind as we're looking at possibilities. I think especially so this particular need is filling an operator role, which does have to be a little bit facility specific, But what we would love to do and what we can do is have programming that's a little bit more hybrid. And so you have potentially some online education aspects, but then also a specific training time where you can go to the site. And so although a lot of this focus is on this cohort and pilot training that we're running this summer, the larger picture is kind of bringing that bigger picture aspect together, and how can we really have a few different types of training programs that fit those different needs. And so that'll be a big part of this jobs report analysis and voice of customer survey work that we're doing. So definitely we encourage everyone to add their comments to their form, to the form. We've created a survey that everyone's allowed to kind of add their input. And so we have it on that site that I put in the chat there, dakotabioworks.org/learn.
Yeah. Yeah, we really want to make sure that we get this voice of customer was again a key point for BioMade. And when they reviewed our grant, they were really excited about the fact that we weren't just sort of creating this in a vacuum, and that we were addressing, the state and the upper Midwest region's needs. And that's the best way. Responding to that survey is really the best way for us to be able to understand, how best to structure all of this. Tamara had a kind of a comment and suggestion here. Thank you for for acknowledging the approach. And Tamara goes on to say that the micro-credentials fit into the research scale, but maybe consider full industry validated credentials such as aseptic processing, quality control, et cetera, for later in the pathway, and provided a link for that. I think you're spot on that, yeah, a lot of the micro-credentialing has focused on kind of lab scale and keeping with the idea that we have that, we need to create credentialing that is consistent with, again, I'll use my term of, the big toys in the big sandbox. And that, micro credentialing or badging, for an operator that, has experience with distack centrifuge or tangential flow filtration or some of the other kind of unit operations. I think that is exactly the kind of thing that we can start to create. And again, I think what's important for that is to make certain that these are credentials that industry members recognize and appreciate.
And I will just add in, Tamara, you're welcome to chime in on this as well. Another conversation I just had with the Nebraska Community College Group is they actually do micro-credentialing through their own local university. So I know that there's a few different options around that. But yeah, I know, I see that you're from Florida, so that's awesome. We'd love to hear about your experience as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm crashing your state, but I'm so
No
excited about
worries.
this. And Neil, I talked to you, I think the year before last at the BioMade event in Minneapolis, and I just love this. And no, I really brought this up really because it really touches on two things. One is right the idea that we really want to prepare candidates for careers rather than jobs, and so by expanding on right that toolkit and their recognition and their capabilities. And then, Kara, what you touched on too, where, right, we need to be careful. We need to find that sweet spot in training where it's not too facility specific or even equipment specific, because especially in a GMP environment, it's really hard to untrain someone to retrain someone on the company specific process or protocol. And so you really want to kind of find those, right, the more, yeah, generic standards. I hate to use that word, um, but no, super excited, and however we can help or contribute, I'm really happy to do so.
Awesome. Thanks, Tamara. Neil, I did want you to address one other question we got about actually IP.
Okay.
And how do you handle that as a contractor?
All right. I was looking
This
so
one came in actually as a side.
okay, got it. Okay, in terms of IP. So I think so I'm going to answer the question in the way I'm kind of interpreting it. As far as this training um, cohort, this pre-apprenticeship program is concerned, that is going to be done sort of separately. So, Ananda Nanjanda Swami has a process that for growing carotenoid producing yeast that is central to his lab, and we're going to use that as an example process that the students will work on through at the lab scale, large lab scale, pilot scale, along with the DSP. So on the training program side of things, we are not working on client projects. That training will not take place. It'll take place um, on an example bioprocess. But as far as once a trainee becomes a full apprentice, well, then they are an employee of the company, and then they're going to be bound by, the confidentiality agreements that the company actually has. So that I don't think that is going to be, will be an issue.
Thanks, Neil. Ben, you had a question about physical media for advertising. I'm happy to send along information to you. And externships. I know we've talked about this idea in the past. How can we get more teachers exposed to these career pathways? And I think we don't, that's definitely something that we're trying to look at. How can we further promote? We're potentially going after some grants or something like that. We'll keep it as a part of our report as well. But actually, just in the last BioMade meeting, that was a really strong topic as well.
Yeah. I would probably say that this was something that in my conversation with Phil Tramer, who's the vice principal at Brookings High School, this was something that he and I discussed about, if you want to really attract students, you need to attract the mentors that that have that are providing guidance to those students. So I think this sort of train the trainer approach is something that I think will be very important. And again, the training laboratory that we created and the benchtop bioreactors, this is something that would be perfect, I think, for bringing in STEM teachers and being able to kind of provide um, a bit of exposure on that. It may not be something that we do for 8 full weeks, but if we can just give them a little bit of a taste of what this is about, I think it makes, it certainly works in our favor in terms of how of how students are going to view biomanufacturing. All right. Next one I have is SD Bio a member of BioMade? And Carrie, you replied yes. South Dakota Dakota BioWorx is also a part of BioMade. Uh,
And then Jeremy had another
Jeremy,
question about.
yeah, this is really important. Um, a lot, yeah. This is very much. Um, I think where we're going to distinguish ourselves from some of the programs that are out there in Mass Bioed in Massachusetts, and I believe that there's um, a program in the Research Triangle Park. Um, is they are focused on creating biopharma and pharma, operators. This is going to be, we really want this to be industrial biotech focused. That is not to say that industrial biotech is not without its kind of regulatory bodies. If you're working in the food space, food ingredients, etc., or making an ag biological, you may have regulatory environments there. So I think there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide when it comes to regulatory bodies, I think. But Jeremy, yeah, this is going to focus on um, um, industrial applications. Um, and I think that's another thing that is going to be appealing to um, people in the state, people in the, in the upper Midwest region.
Awesome. In our last minute, yeah, if there's any other comments or questions, we're happy to take them. I think, Neil, if you want to just do a recap on the timeline for the program this summer too, or just a
Sure.
reminder.
Right. So first is the disclaimer that the federal government got a little backed up on reviewing grants and going through contracts. This was all supposed to kick off roughly last September. And we kind of signed our subaward agreement in March. So our timeline is very compressed for kind of initiating this sort of voice of customer, job forecasting, and then creating this training program. We felt it was important that we have our training program, our training course over the summer. It starts June the 1st. And it goes through July the 21st, so the first 8 weeks. And then the last 2 weeks are going to be some additional training on OSHA 10, updating CVs, evaluating the course, but also hopefully doing some mock interviews with some biomanufacturing professionals so that there's a real solid understanding of, okay, what did these people get out of this course? So the recruiting, we're trying to recruit 8 maximum into this training cohort. And a big part of this training cohort is not, that we've got it all figured out. This is a prototype. It is meant to help us understand what is the curriculum that we need to deliver and how to deliver it at the level that is appropriate for these, for these operational people. So they won't, the trainees that come through this course are not going to be a finished product per se, because the course is not a finished product at this point. And I think between what we learn and the voice of customer, we will refine this over time, which is one of the reasons why this is actually that our funding is for a design of a program.
Yeah, and I think just another shout out on that, if companies have new hires that they would want to enroll their employees on this training, we would be, incredibly supportive of that hybrid approach as well.
Yeah, we're trying to get a broad kind of a broad group of people, representative of from different backgrounds that we can include in this program. I think we're good through what, the 11th or the 12th, Kara? Okay.
Yeah, we put a deadline here of May 10th, but if you need a little bit more time, we're happy to work with you as well for that decision.
Yeah. So Jeremy, let me just kind of thank Joni for kind of the group and just saying um, about this voice of customer. Be on the lookout for this voice of customer survey. If you haven't received it and you want to fill it out, we would welcome your input. The mailing list, was our best estimate of who should get this. But please, 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 we want to collect as much information and as many data points on this as possible. Um, Jeremy asked, what does the program look like for time? So this is going to be a 40-hour a week, 8-week program, hands-on. So this is a pretty intense program. The students are going to be paid a stipend that's provided, that was budgeted in the grant. But yeah, this is going to be a full-time effort. It's not going to be part-time in terms of this particular training program. So it will be, we are building out the curriculum um, as we speak to kind of touch on all of the what we currently view as the important things to touch on.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's awesome, Jeremy.
oh yeah,
And then Tamara's question, yeah, it's not just exclusive to South Dakota. And I do want to point out we do have housing available on the SDSU campus. So for those coming from more remote areas, we want to be able to accommodate you as well. Any final comments? I know we're over time, so we should probably wrap this up, but we're happy to continue these discussions afterwards. Feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll probably be reaching out to some of you as well. Neil, any closing remarks and any?
no, thank you very much for your time this morning and the questions. We're just getting started, and I'm very excited by the prospects of what we're building here. I think it perfectly aligns with what the federal government views as the importance of biomanufacturing, um, and the need to have a workforce that can support that biomanufacturing. And my hope is that if we've got our workforce development ducks in a row, we will begin attracting um, folks from the coasts to set up their manufacturing shops in South Dakota. That is ultimately what I hope to see.
Yep. Yeah, just a little more support for our region. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.